Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of my segment, Tales from the Sales by Eddie Does IT. And in this video, we're going to be discussing Cisco Secure Connect, a powerful SASE solution unified by Cisco Meraki and Cisco Umbrella. As always, if this information is useful, like, comment, subscribe is appreciated. Cisco Secure Connect provides fast and seamless access for users who need to connect to their applications no matter where they're coming from. This could be from an on-prem location, branch office, remote office, or even working from home. Secure Connect provides strong security, ensuring that your users and devices are compliant with your organization's policies. A true all-in-one defense system, providing DNS security, cloud-delivered firewall, secure web gateway, CASB and DLP checks for secure internet access, and cloud-delivered firewall for secure private access for applications hosted in public, private, or on-campus data centers. Remote users can have the same experience through Cisco's unified secure client when combining AnyConnect's VPN module with Umbrella's roaming module. You can also have Umbrella's roaming module only for secure internet access. And then we have clientless remote access, which is part of the complete Essentials and Advantage package for SAML authentication, built-in identity provider, posture and access control, as well as remote access. As far as prerequisites, Meraki SD-WAN or Cisco SD-WAN would be required. In my case, I'm using the Meraki MX67W. For managed endpoints, Cisco's unified secure client would be required in order to run the AnyConnect module as well as the Umbrella roaming module, and any browser for clientless access. Now, some of the key differences between client-based and client-less access is that client-less is browser-based. So we can check for operating system versions, if the firewall is running on the endpoint, as well as geolocation. Now we're going to head over to the clientless remote browser access section, where users can connect to their private applications no matter where they're coming from, whether it's a coffee shop, airport, airplane, hotel, working from home, or for users who are always on the go, all without the need of installing managed software on their device. Users would need to pass authentication through their identity provider. In my case, it's Entra ID, where I have conditional access configured, requiring users to pass multi-factor authentication as a secondary authenticator when accessing my private applications. Users would need to enter their username and password, followed by an MFA prompt out to their device. If the user fails primary authentication, secondary authentication, or both, the user would be denied. Now, even if the user were to pass authentication, they could still be denied access if not authorized. A good example would be if the device is out of compliance or the user does not have access to the application. The user would then be denied. If the user passes authentication and does meet the minimum requirements, for example, they're running the minimum version required for the operating system, as well as the minimum version required for the allowed browsers, the user would then be granted access to the private application through the ztna proxy server, where it would then interconnect through the IPsec tunnel out to your private network. So next, we're going to go into the configuration, followed by the demonstration. In the Secure Connect overview page in the Meraki dashboard, I'm going to click on Connect Sites and then Connect Meraki Networks, where we can see my network, which is my remote office, as well as my device type, which is the MX67. When I assign to region, I'm going to select the nearest one to me, which is the US Central region. Notice I also get 2 data centers assigned to me for high availability. Next, click Finish and Save, where we can see my deployment start to take place. And this really does take just a few seconds after my routes have been updated for my network to be added to Secure Connect. Once I click on the network, we can see my device information, my network that's being advertised. If I hop over to the site-to-site information page in the Meraki dashboard, we can see the 2 data centers that were assigned when I selected the US Central region. We can see my network that's being advertised, as well as my networks that are not being advertised, and the concentrator priority information. Next, I need to configure my identity provider information for authentication and authorization for clientless remote access. Under Secure Connect, I'm going to jump over to additional configurations, which is going to open up the Umbrella dashboard. And under deployments, I'm going to select SAML configuration, click on Add. In my case, I'm going to select Azure and then click Next. This page is letting us know that I can upload my XML file from my identity provider or manually add the federated configuration. I'm going to download the Umbrella metadata file, and on this page is where I can upload my Entra ID metadata XML file once I've provisioned my application and configured single sign-on. I'm going to jump over to my Entra ID tenant and then enterprise applications so I can create new application. Once my application has been provisioned, I need to assign access. In my case, I'm doing identity group-based access. So I'll be assigning 2 test groups with each group containing 1 member user that I'll be using to test access to my 2 private applications that I'll be adding to my Secure Connect network. Now I need to configure single sign-on. Under basic SAML configuration, I can manually add the identifier as well as the reply URL, which you can find these values in the XML metadata next to entity ID. You can see the certificate information listed, as well as the assertion URL next to location. Because Entra ID does support uploading the metadata file, I'm just going to keep it simple and upload the file that I downloaded previously from my Umbrella dashboard. Once uploaded, you can see that the values were added for me. Once I click on save and single sign-on has been configured, I can get the federated metadata information located at the bottom. Here we can see the federation metadata URL, the certificate information. I'm going to download the federation metadata XML file, which I'm going to now upload to my Umbrella dashboard. Click next. Here I can choose how often I want to re-authenticate my users. I'm going to leave this on the default set to daily. Now I can test configuration. And we can see that my SAML configuration test completed successfully. So now we can add my 2 private applications as my test applications. The first one is a learning application. We can see the private certificate that was issued by my internal certificate authority. We can see the issuer information, validity period, as well as the internal hierarchy information. For my second private application, it's my IT asset management application. Same thing, we can see the private certificate issued by my internal private certificate authority. Next, I'm going to add my first private application. I'm going to select browser-based access and enter the IP address of my web application. We can see the port number and protocol. Next, I'm going to enter the internal fully qualified domain name of my web server. I'm going to keep it simple, so no need to validate the application certificate. The external URL and the public certificate will be generated once the application has been provisioned, leaving private applications group empty for now, as I'm going to create that on the next step. Here we see that the external URL has now been created. So I'm going to jump back over to the application section and then create my application groups for my business critical apps. I'm going to select my IT asset management application and then add it to the group. Next, I'm going to create my secondary private application, which is my learning application. Same thing, I'm going to select browser-based access, enter the IP address of my web server, enter the internal fully qualified domain name of my web server, and we can now see the external URL has been created. Next, I need to create my secondary applications group for my less restrictive applications. I'm going to select my learning application and then add it to the group. Next step, I need to create the endpoint posture profile. Notice I already have a posture profile configured, so I need to create a new one for my more restrictive applications. I'm going to give my posture profile a name. For operating systems, I'm going to select all major operating systems: Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. For Windows, I'm requiring that all Windows devices be running the latest version. Now for Mac OS, there's a caveat. You cannot select a specific version. This is because browsers are unable to report the correct version for Mac OS. iOS, same thing. I'm requiring the iOS to be running the latest version, as well as for all Android devices. For the grace period to run the latest version, I'm going to set it to 2 weeks before users are denied access until they remediate their devices. For selected browsers, I'm only going to allow Chrome and Edge, and I'm also going to require that both run the latest version. Same thing for the grace period. For locations, I'm only allowing access within the US. Let's take a look at my other posture profile, which is for my less restrictive applications. We can see that I have the same operating system selected, but a little bit more lax on the minimum requirements. Grace period to run the minimum requirements set to 30 days. For selected browsers, this time I've added Safari, Firefox, Edge Chromium, and as well as more lax on the required versions. Same thing for the grace period, set to 30 days. And same thing for the location, only allowing access within the US. So now I have two posture profiles, one for my less restrictive applications group and the second for the more restrictive applications group. Next, I need to configure browser access. So I'm going to jump over to browser access and then create rules. Select add rule, give it a name, action set to allow. For my groups, this is my restrictive group, so I'm going to select privilege administrators. For application groups, this is my restrictive applications groups that I configured previously. And then for the endpoint posture profile, I'm going to add the more restrictive posture profile that I just created. Next, I'm going to create my second rule for my less restrictive applications group. This time I'm selecting my application administrators group, private apps group that I created previously, and then my less restrictive endpoint posture profile. I now have two allowed rules, one for each applications group, and now we can go ahead and test this out. I'm going to jump back over to my two private applications and test the first one, Edit Protect, which is my more restrictive application. We can see the IP address to my application, server name, as well as the external URL. Now, to truly test this, I'll be using a virtual machine coming from the cloud. We can see the IP address, the location coming from a Microsoft data center located in the central US region. First application test is the more restrictive application, using an identity account from the restrictive applications group that I created, going through primary authentication, followed by secondary authentication, and now I have access to my IT asset management application. We can confirm this by taking a look at the external certificate. We can see that it's a wildcard certificate. We see the issuer information, validity period, as well as the root certificate authority information. Next, I'm going to test with an identity account that's a member of the secondary group I created previously. This group does not have access, so the expectation is that I'm denied. So I'm going through primary authentication. Once again, I'm going through multi-factor authentication, and now I'm denied access. Now I'm going to test my second private application, which is less restrictive. Just like before, we can see the IP address, the internal fully qualified domain name, as well as the external URL. Using the same cloud virtual machine and testing with the identity account that's a member of the secondary group that's less restricted. Same thing, passing primary authentication as well as multi-factor authentication, and now I have access. Just like before, we can confirm this by looking at the external public certificate, which will be the same wildcard. Next, let's take a look at the posturing. So if I log into the same application with the same identity account, we can see that I'm denied access because my browser is not up to date. If I test access again from a Linux device, which does not have access to any of my posture profiles, the expectation is that I'm denied access. So now I'm going to look at the logs in Entra ID, and then I'm going to look at the logs in Secure Connect. In Entra ID, we can see the login information, the IP address, the location, as well as the authentication requirement. But really, we want to take a look at the logs over in Cisco Secure Connect. And this is going to take us to the umbrella dashboard. Under activity search, I'm just going to filter this by private applications. The first log is when I logged into my privileged application using an identity account that's a member of my restricted group. The second log is when I attempted to log into the same application using an identity account who is a member of my second group, which does not have access to this application. Using that same account, I logged into my second private application, which this group does have access to. I then used that same account to log into the same application using a Safari browser, which is allowed in my posture policy. However, it does not meet the minimum requirements. It must be updated in order for me to gain access. And the last log is when I attempted to log in from a Linux device, which is not allowed in my posture policies. All right, that concludes my video on Cisco Secure Connect. It was an absolute pleasure. And as always, stay tuned.